need to get this place checked out. What's up, everybody? It's Nick back here to continue the Evil Dead franchise revisited reviews, whatever you want to call it. We've never done these before on the channel, so I guess we're just going to call it the Road to Evil Dead Rise. And we're continuing today with what I think is inarguably the greatest Evil Dead film, Evil Dead 2. The long story short, the first movie having such a low budget, it made a decent profit and a sequel was greenlit, but it took 6 years for the sequel to hit theaters. There was a lot of reasons for that. One of the main reasons was rights issues. Let's get this out of the way first and foremost. The opening of this movie is not a remake. I mean, I guess in the way that it's like, oh, well, it's retelling the events of the previous movie with different actors and whatnot. Yes and no. There were two reasons why they did this. One was because, obviously, the first movie was a very low-budget indie film that didn't really get a ton of exposure, so they were hoping this one would be bigger, it would get a wider release, more mainstream audiences would see it, and they were worried that some people just hadn't seen the first movie. The other reason, and the biggest reason, was a rights issue. See, they did not own the rights to the first movie, but they wanted to catch the audience back up with the first movie. Well, in order to do that, they had to kind of retell it quickly with a new Linda and kind of a different set of circumstances that led to the end of the first movie of Ash getting, attacked by the entity. That's what the opening of this movie is. It is not a remake. This movie was never intended to be a remake. So when I watch this movie, does it kind of throw me off a little bit? I mean, yeah, because I'm like, I don't know. This is I don't need it personally, but I understand why they did it. So let's just get that out of the way. Not a remake. And you will hear the same thing about another movie in this series in a few videos. But let's stick to Evil Dead 2 right now. As I said at the beginning, I think Evil Dead 2 is the best Evil Dead movie. And as you guys know how I do with these things, I really just talk about what I really like about these movies and give you an overall thoughts on said movie. First of all, with Evil Dead 2, this is when Bruce Campbell really just took over the role of Ash Williams, and they stopped calling him Ashley entirely. If you know, his name is actually Ashley, but started calling him Ash, and he had the bona fide badass persona in this movie, and he lived up to it. There are some just incredibly iconic moments from Bruce's career all in this movie, really. Like, you get your first groovy, you really get the creation of the boomstick and the chainsaw hand. I mean, all of that's here. This movie, with the iconography, it's insane. Like, it's infinitely quotable and memorable. So, Bruce steals the show, and he, like I said with the first movie, it's not till the end of that movie where you start to really realize who you're supposed to be rooting for and following. No, in this movie, from the very beginning. Another thing about this movie, and this is something I said about the first movie, and you'll probably continue to hear me say about these subsequent sequels, the makeup effects, and just really the effects in general. This movie does something really interesting, and it uses a lot of stop motion, and stop motion doesn't age super well. You can definitely tell, obviously what is stop motion and what isn't, but I feel like that's kind of part of the charm of this movie and movies from this era that did the same thing. I love the way that it creates this almost like cartoonish, hellish visual. It's kind of perfect for these movies. I mean, it's just one scene in particular that will always stick out with you is Linda. I mean, that sequence is terrifying. When she gets reanimated and she's dancing around still to this day creeps me out. Rewatching this movie yesterday, I was like, this is just unsettling. It's uncomfortable. Obviously, you get Henrietta, good old Ted Raimi in the suit. And that is just infinitely memorable as well. There are so many moments like that throughout this movie where it's a lot of stop motion, and Sam Raimi directs those scenes really well and in a different kind of way, almost to where it's like you feel it's like interdimensional almost at times. Like you definitely feel like, okay, things have changed. And I love that about this movie. But again, I have to say, just like with the first movie and piggybacking off of that point, the makeup effects, the gore, it's awesome. It's awesome in this movie. I mean, it's just as good, if not better than the first movie. They had a little bit more money, so I'm more inclined to say it's better. Obviously, buckets of blood in this movie. Black ooze, green blood, you name it. It's all over the place. It's just awesome. Like with an Evil Dead movie, it's kind of a prerequisite. You have to cover the walls in every bodily fluid imaginable. Yeah. Again, certain things that don't really need to be delved into too deep. Obviously, it's the same setting, cabin in the woods. It's, you're following Ash. You get new characters in here. And I gotta say, compared to the first movie, they are very different. I do love that this new group that comes here doesn't feel like it's a carbon copy of the group we got in the first movie. You have Bobby Joe, and you have Annie Nobe, obviously, and, Annie, first of all, just gotta say, I think I like the character. I really do like the character. My God, her scream, though. Jesus, like she screams like throughout most of the second half of this movie, and it's like it's a good scream, but it's like so like ear piercing that you're just like, please shut up, like a deadite, just like eat her face, please. Bobby Joe is okay, whatever, and the redneck truck driver dude, he's got like some funny moments, but he's really there to be like the brawn, but not really because he's dumb. These characters in these movies sometimes are there for one reason and one reason only. For the entity to move through them or to cut them up in the process of trying to get to Ash. But again, it's a good group. It's a group that they have funny moments, they have memorable moments, and you're just kind of like, okay, cool. Like, I'm not wanting to rip my eyeballs out and, bust my eardrums watching these people on screen. So kudos to them there. I have to say, too, just like with the first movie, again, it's a Sam Raimi thing. The visual style and the sound design and using, again, the camera as a character and the woods as a character, it's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, it really adds to these movies. Without Sam Raimi in these first three movies, and it's not to say other people can't do Evil Dead movies, because obviously we'll get to Evil Dead 2013, but I don't think these three movies would be near as effective as they are without Sam Raimi, just for that time period. Like, I really just don't think they would have been. So a lot of, if not most of the credit has to go to him. But the thing about Evil Dead 2, the reason why I say that this is the best Evil Dead movie is because I feel like it's where Evil Dead found its footing. Now, some people might say, well, no, the first one is a little more serious and straightforward. And that is true. And then you get to Army of Darkness that is just pretty much full-on dark comedy. This movie is a perfect blend of the two for me. So I guess in that sense, if that's what you're looking for, then it's going to be your perfect Evil Dead movie. But if it's not, it might not be. But I would argue that it's where Evil Dead works best, is when it plays both sides of it. I've always felt like Evil Dead, especially with Sam Raimi at the helm, knowing his style, it works best when it's got that dark humor and also that gross out horror. Like, it has to have both. And I feel like this movie delivers both in spades. There's the sequence of Ash just kind of laughing and losing his shit while, everything else in the house is laughing, and he's kind of like, whoa, y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to reenact it. And it's funny. It's darkly comedic, and it's also at the same time you're watching it and you're uncomfortable because you're like, this guy is full-blown insane. Like, he's losing his mind. But at the same time, it just makes you feel so many things because you're also like, but like, I kind of would be too, because like, this is really happening, and like, who would believe you? So it's wild. Like, it is a wild ride in that sense. But I think that it marries the two perfectly, and I think this movie has perfect amounts of both. The Henrietta shit, it is creepy. I really do think, I remember the first time I watched this movie and Ash is on the steps of the cellar begging to be let out as Henrietta's coming to him, and I'm just like, oh my God, bro. Like, that stuff freaked me out. Like, it really did. And obviously I said Linda with the, stop motion dancing is scary. There's some genuinely freaky shit in here, 30 plus years later that ages really well and still freaks me out, having seen the movie dozens of times, while also some uncomfortably funny stuff in here. One of the most iconic horror scenes, I think it was on a list of like Bravo's 100 scariest movie moments. I think it was. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. It was on years and years ago. It was Ash's hand scene. And I don't think that scene is scary, so I don't know why it would be that scene out of this movie that they put on that list. But regardless, I do think a scene in this movie should have been on that list. And that scene is iconic. I mean, it is the birth of us realizing that it can be transferred, just got a bite basically, like, and it can just take over a limb and not just the entire host, like the infected part of it, which will play on, later on into the series. And then you obviously get the cutting off of the hand and creating the chainsaw arm. I mean, it's freaking awesome. I mean, I could go on and on about this movie, but again, I feel like I've made my points very clear. I think it marries comedy and horror perfectly. I think that the cast is really good, but of course, this movie stands on the shoulders of Bruce Campbell, and he delivers. I think it's got so many iconic one-liners and iconic scenes. I think it's gross. I think it's genuinely freaky. I think the setting, the direction, the sound design, it's all there. I mean, I don't know what more you could want from a horror movie. Like, I really don't. And again, I did say if the black comedy being added in isn't really your thing, I understand that. So maybe you'd want a little less of that. Maybe that's why the first movie works better for you. But for me, I just feel like this is Evil Dead at its best. And if Evil Dead Rise can come anywhere near where this movie goes, it's going to be a bona fide hit for me. So honestly, guys, I would give Evil Dead 2 a straight up 5 out of 5. I mean, I have no complaints about this movie. None. You know, Bobby Joe does get grazed by a bullet, and it's just never mentioned again, and she doesn't really bleed much. So that's kind of weird, but that's nitpicking. You know what I mean? Like, I really just don't have complaints about this movie, and that's kind of a common theme with this series. But anyway, let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of Evil Dead 2. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Did you grow to love it? Did it fall out of favor with you? Did any of you get to see this in the theater in its original run? Discuss all of that and more down below in the comment section. Leave a like on this video. And thank you guys for joining me on this trip leading up to Evil Dead Rise. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I am pulling out.